Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace, mercy, and blessings of God be upon you. I'm your host, Aryan al-Mahdi.
نعم حسام علي المهدي.
أنا جميل على مهدي.
And welcome back to the Goal of the Wise show, a show in which we exclusively really talk about the contents of the book, The Goal of the Wise, written by Abdullah Hashim Abu Sadiq, the Qa'im, the Masri, the Mahdi, mentioned by Muhammad and the family Muhammad, the awaited world savior to come, who has come, obviously. You can read the book yourself and tag along with us as we go through this in-depth journey with the Goal of the Wise. A QR code should be on the screen for you to scan. And the book is available in multiple languages, by the way, in English, Arabic, French, Spanish, German, and a multitude of other languages, and many more languages to come, inshallah, in the future. So, okay, let's actually dive back into where we left off. Just as a little summary, we talked previously about the lunar calendar. And we basically mentioned how the lunar calendar was a false calendar that was innovated by Umar ibn Khattab. It is a calendar which makes no sense due to the naming of certain months. Like, for example, you have Rabi al-Awwal, which is the first month of spring, landing sometimes in the Muslim, the Gregorian calendar in seasons such as winter and fall and summer, rather than spring itself. And due to the fact that we also said that Ramadan, the holy month of Ramadan, is always in December. And we talked about how the ritual of fasting in the month of Ramadan is totally different than the ritual aspect of what the Muslims have, in which they excessively eat food to the point that they're hospitalized. They spend money extravagantly, and Ramadan, which became a 30-day Christmas holiday for the Muslim world, where they basically perform the most sins and eat the most foods and stuff themselves with so much dunya that it is unrealistically funny, actually, you know. But what can you do? But that's why the Qa'im comes. That's why the Mahdi comes. He comes to demolish all of these false idols. And he demolished the lunar calendar, and he demolished this false idea of fasting in the month of Ramadan and replaced it with its true fasting and its true practices. And by the way, just as a disclaimer, also, just as the Imam said in the book, you know, for the Muslims and for the believers to await the month of Ramadan and its true practices. So inshallah, one day we will have more input into what those practices are one day. So anyway, without further ado, let's get into the next episode. We actually promised that we would be talking about on this episode the veil, or the hijab. The hijab has been seen by the Muslim world as a symbol of the religion of Islam. It has also been a symbol of modesty. It has also been a symbol of choice of a woman to now practice her religion if she wants to. But it has also been a symbol, unfortunately, which has been attributed to extremism also, and has been also attributed to oppression, rather than just only modesty. And it's also been attributed to even slavery to some extent. But you know, now to address the elephant in the room, obviously the viewers, you guys are smart. You obviously can tell just by the tone of what I am saying that the hijab is something that is abolished by the Qa'im of the family Muhammad as an obligation. And the reality of the hijab is something that I think is going to shock a lot of Muslims, but for those who have actually understood Islam, for them this will be like cold water that passes down their throat and has like a cooling effect on the body, as if like, my God, this is a relief for us. And actually, let's play the clip of a passage of the Goal of the Wise explaining this understanding of what the hijab really is.
The abolition of the head veil, hijab, as an obligation. Imam Ahmad al-Hasan, from him is peace, said to me one day, "After you finish your work, have some of the women remove their veils. Do not command anyone to. Whoever wants to remove their veil can do so." I said, "Good then. As long as it is not part of your jurisprudence, what is the need for it?" The Imam, from him is peace, said, "No, it is not, and it shall not ever be either. The veil has become a sunnah, tradition, custom. Just as Abdul Muttalib introduced matters which became sunnah, and then it took root in Islam and became a practice. So in the seventh covenant, the wearing of a head veil, or hijab by women, is not obligatory, but rather it is only a sunnah. We do not encourage wearing it, nor do we forbid it. Each person is free to wear it or not to wear it, for it was never a divine obligation from God Almighty, but rather it was a sunnah, just as brushing teeth with a miswak was a sunnah, or sleeping while upon wudu. The sunnah of hijab was not even one that was introduced by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his family, but rather it was originally introduced by Abdul Muttalib, peace be upon him. Indeed, there were members of the holy household who wore the veil. Imam Ahmad al-Hassan, from him is peace, said, Fatima al-Zahra, peace be upon her, was veiled from head to toe. Even with that being the case, we do not take a sunnah as a divine command and make it obligatory. Those times differed from these times. What might have been necessary then is not now.
So if anybody wants to review what we just played, you are more than welcome to check out the pages 117 to 118 in the Goal of the Wise. But in summary, what we can see here is that the hijab is not something that we're against. The hijab is something which we believe was a sunnah. It was a sunnah of the grandfather of Prophet Muhammad, Abdul Muttalib, and it was practiced by the family of Muhammad, peace be upon him and his family. Just as Imam Ahmad al-Hassan, from him his peace, said, Fatima Zahra wore a veil that covered herself from her head down to her toes. So we're not saying that a woman cannot wear hijab, but we're also saying to a woman who isn't wearing hijab that she must wear hijab. This is a religion that guarantees a person freedom to dress with a hijab or not a hijab. It is not an obligation. You don't get points for wearing it. But it is something that, okay, is a sunnah. You are more than welcome to do it if you like. Just as growing your hair long for males is a sunnah. It's not something bad if you grow your hair long. Braiding the hair, 4 times, just as Prophet Muhammad did, is a sunnah. Getting your ears pierced, from here and here, is a sunnah as well. But it is not something obligatory upon the believers. So, I think that's something that's important, and that's something that I think is revolutionary now for the people, that they don't have to abide by a strict head covering. They don't. And this is something that I think is a relief for many Muslim women out there who are actually struggling with this concept. And they feel as if they're forced and compelled to do something that they don't feel comfortable with. And for the most part, some of them even argue against this obligation and say they don't even know where it is.
Where it's coming from, yeah.
Yeah, where is it coming from?
Where does it come from? Is it in the Quran? Is it in in the Hadith? Or what Hadith? About which side? Is it Shia, Sunni? Is it like the idea of hijab has been disagreed upon by the scholars, not agreed on? The majority of the scholars, of course, they say consensus of the scholars. That means that the majority of them say they took a specific route of faith in their hadith. But there are other people, other scholars who are actually also educated and also read the same books these guys read, and they came to different conclusions, and they have their own arguments versus the obligation of hijab. So I think one of the interesting things that we could dive into is where did this concept of hijab to begin with came from? Like, where did this head covering start with in, let's say, in the Abrahamic religions?
Yeah, I think one thing to point out as well is what the Imam says at the end of this clip. It says, those times differed from these times, and what might have been necessary then is not necessary now. Yeah. And just to expand on the point before we dive into sort of the origins of this, what we can call innovation when we present everything. If you look at the sort of climate today in modern times, in a way it's actually a danger to be wearing a hijab. Yeah. If you see it in the Western countries, like hate attacks and these kind of things that happen in UK, Fanatics, in France, exactly. You can almost be a target for wearing hijab.
No, you do get targeted.
Exactly.
There are many women in European countries like France, as you mentioned, and different parts, even Germany. In fact, my wife was one of them. So the idea is that she was in Germany and she put the hijab on and she got punched for it.
Yeah.
So the idea is there are people who are fanatics out there, and they actually do harm the Muslim sisters who are actually just trying to obey what their scholars have told them that is an obligation from God. So they take it as a sacrifice, a self-sacrifice on themselves, even though it's not necessary.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where I was going with it, because you see the same on the flip side in places like Iran, where if you don't wear it, you might just disappear, and no one ever sees you again. Like these, these young girls that were dancing on TikTok and stuff without wearing the hijab, and then they don't get heard of. So we're just here today to again clarify that 99% of all religions are corrupt, especially Islam as well. And this is another one of these deviations, these corruptions that obviously have no real basis in Islam as an obligation, something that they should be punished for. And on the topic of sort of how this all came about, the innovations, it's obviously something that is very prevalent in Abrahamic faith. You see Jewish women, they have their version of headdresses and hijab. You see Christians with none and pictures of Mother Mary, always hairs covered. And it's obviously very prevalent in Islam. The hijab is something that I think is most popular or most associated with Islam today. So we've got a verse from the Book of Numbers, the Hebrew Bible, and we can just read that. It says, "The priest shall have the woman stand before the Lord, loosen her hair, and place in her hands the offering of memorial, the grain offering for jealousy, while he himself holds the bitter water that brings a curse." And this is a verse from, again, the Book of Numbers. It's the Hebrew part of the Bible. But what's interesting to note is that Moses, and the Jews, they have an extensive list of laws, right?
Exactly,
and they have the Ten Commandments, but they also have like over 600,000 or something, different individual, very specific laws. And not one of them is that the woman has to have a head veil, right?
True.
We can go into the sort of context behind this verse and how that all came about. And it's the sort of jurisprudence of corrupt scholars again, something that we find is happening in every day and age, that these corrupt scholars, they do ijtihad, something that you love to talk about, innovation and interpretation without no actual basis or appointment of God to back their decisions.
Right.
So, if we get into the history of this...
I think it's very interesting because ijtihad shares, this word in Arabic shares the same root of jihad, right? Which is struggle. So it is because these scholars don't have a clear-cut verse, say for example, or a law from Moses, right? Or a Quranic verse that is very clear about a matter. So they start to struggle with this matter, they search and research, and they find whatever they can use to interpret in their own understanding, with their own opinions, and come up with a conclusion. So in this case, this is a perfect example actually for Judaic kind of concept of ijtihad, which is this struggle to find something, to make up some conclusion out of thin air, which is in this verse you just read, where how did they actually come about making it a thing, this hijab, or this wearing of the headscarf for the women, is because they have a hadith like that, a narration like that, where it says that if a man is jealous, say for example you got jealous from your wife, but you don't have any evidence for it, you don't have anything, any strange things, evidence that you can present in the court of law.
No neighbors are
witnessing, exactly. Nothing is happening. You just feel something strange in your heart, and therefore you want to affirm that, or remove it. So what do? You take your wife and you go to the priest, to the high judge, right? And the judge would get your wife, and they would untie the hair of the sister. And then they would make a curse upon them. They would make a curse upon her. She would accept it if she is lying, then the curse would fall on her. If she's not lying, then the curse would not fall on her, and therefore that solves the problem, right? As in, his doubts now should be removed, because it's in the hand of God now. He's the greater judge. So now what happens is that because of this word, untying of the woman's hair, of the sister's hair, what happens is that the scholars took that part specifically And they said, therefore, it must have been that the woman was wearing a headscarf.
Exactly.
Therefore, it must have been a law with Moses that the women had to cover their hair. So, but this is an innovation. This is just a thought of a person who it could have eaten, because it says untie. It could have been easily something like this, which she had tied her hair with,
some form of braid,
or something with braids,
exactly.
or braids or whatever. They did all kinds of stuff. So
because it says loosen her hair, not loosen a veil that is upon her head.
Exactly.
So now they're just making up stuff. They're making a stretch into words and trying to make connections when actually there's nothing really to connect. I mean, for crying out loud, we once talked about how David, pierced and saw Bathsheba bathing. I mean, it's not like she was wearing a headscarf while she was bathing.
No, of course not. So then this is according to, for example, Judaic customs, and there is multiple different types of head coverings that they have in Judaism, and so you can see it online if you'd like. The idea behind that is that this kind of disproves the fact that they don't have a law for it, so it's not actually obligation for it.
Exactly.
So this is not, and back then, keep in mind that wearing a cover, a complete cover, was not the dress code of a nobleman.
Of course not. Actually, if we actually look at the Old Testament, we find that if a woman covers herself completely, it's because she wants to hide her identity.
Exactly.
But why does she want to hide her identity? She wants to hide her identity because in reality, she is doing something which is shameful. She's doing something which she does not want people to recognize her when she doesn't have the veil anymore. And the story behind this is in the story of Tamar and her father-in-law, who then later on becomes her husband. Tamar and Judah. We find in the book of Genesis a scene in which Tamar poses herself as a prostitute in order to sleep with Judah. And this is according to the Old Testament. And what she does is she takes a veil, which like the description of it is pretty much the niqab that the Muslims wear, or the Muslim women wear. So she wears this, and while she is wearing this, she is having relationships with Judah. Judah does not recognize her, and she's wearing this while she is in this intimate act with Judah. So we actually see her that, yes, the niqab or the veil exists in Judaism, but not something out of modesty and piety, but rather it is something used for women who are conducting themselves into this
prostitution, basically.
Into prostitution.
And just as a final point, you also see in the Songs of Solomon, right? Where he's speaking about his lover, and he's saying that behind she's veiled, and you can see her eyes that are like doves, and her hair that is like a flock of goats. So in this description, these like non-working scholars of that time interpreted this like, her hair, her eyes, these are her beauty, these things make her sexually appealing. So therefore, it must be covered to stop the arousal of men.
But how did he see it?
Exactly. so this is what we're saying, and it's a great fitna that is even prevalent today, because we have this fitna in Islam, we have this fitna in Judaism, as we mentioned so far, because not all Judaic women wear the headdress or head veil, simply because there is no concrete written law about it. It's just interpretation from non-working scholars. So this is again a fitna, and we keep mentioning this this hadith that says, the scholars they come with the fitna it returns
the
to them.
Fitna came out of them, and to them it returns.
Exactly. So this is just another proof of that. So let's progress.
Fitna is like a trial or a test.
Exactly.
So trials came out of them, and tests came out of them, and from them to them it returns.
Exactly, and it leads them to a great confusion. So let's move on to Christianity, because I think the case for Judaism so far is pretty clear, right?
For sure.
Christianity is like when you start to, as Abu Sadiq calls him, actually, let's talk about it, right? Christianity, where did this concept of headscarf came from? It didn't come from Jesus Christ.
No.
Jesus Christ didn't mention it at all anywhere. It was mentioned by Paul,
the false apostle.
Exactly, who claimed to be an apostle even though he's not, right? Which we know then from other sources what that makes sense. The idea what that means. I mean,
and actually we even find in the New Testament scenes in which a woman like Mary, for example, is washing the feet of Jesus, right, with her hair. So if the Christians take that literal reading, and they read it as such, well, okay, like Jesus is not telling Mary, hey, why are you not wearing a headscarf? You know, according to the Christians, Jesus never married. But Mary over here is anointing him on his feet and using her hair to wipe his feet. So we see here that she's not wearing a hijab, she's not wearing a veil, while she is in front of Jesus.
Yeah, so the idea is that when you look into the headscarf, it's definitely man-made. Man-made by who? By Paul.
Exactly.
Paul, who is like who the only proof for is his own claim that he has seen Jesus in an epiphany. That's all. There is no other proof for Paul. The idea is that you have Paul, who came out and he said to the woman, you have to cover your hair. Why though? Because at that time the man is supposed to be like he made it also unlawful for a man to wear anything to cover his head. You know why? Because the concept is that he brought was that between man and God there should be no veil. You cannot wear anything to cover your head so that it can be between you and God, someone else. You know, that's directly you and God. But between the woman and God, there is the male. The male has the authority over the woman. Therefore, she has to cover her hair. That way, that signifies what? That signifies that she is belonging to a man. Like he captured her. That's it. She's his now. So, which is the concept of Paul, where he told women, do not a woman in a church should not speak and should wait until she goes back home and ask her husband about whatever she has questions, and her voice should not be loud or speaking
heard,
heard in the church, meaning that this concept is actually what he was pushing for, which is not a Jesus thing. You know, that's not what Jesus said. You know, so that's in Christianity in a way.
Yeah, and actually we even have the verse to even pull up on the screen. And it's in Book of Corinthians, 1 Corinthians, chapter 11, verse 5 to 6. We find here that Paul says, but every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head. It is the same as having her head shaved. For if a woman does not cover her head, she might as well have her hair cut off. But if it is a disgrace for a woman to have her hair cut off or her head shaved, then she should cover her head. So, okay, we see over here that according to Paul, any works that a woman does, if a woman is religious, if a woman is prophesying, if a woman is praying, if she doesn't have her head covered, she is disgraceful. She might as well cut her head and shave it bald. So, yeah, that's not something that we see from Jesus, as you said. It's not something that we see from the laws of Moses. So then why is it? And you know, it's so funny. One thing that's so funny, which I find ridiculous, is that the Muslims, they say that the Bible is corrupted, right? And then they use the Bible here to validate that the hijab is valid. But they also say Paul is a false apostle. But now and my God, if you read the Gospel or if you read Corinthians, it is not Jesus saying this about women. It's Paul, who they hate, is saying this, that a woman should cover her head or might as well just shave off your head.
Exactly. And Paul is a very interesting character. We've got some comparisons we'll get into later. But, you know, earlier on in his journey, he's actually persecuting Christians, killing Christians. He's a former Jew himself. And in different parts of the Bible, he's saying that I have no direct commandment from God, but I'm a trustful person. So just trust me, and you know, I make decisions.
I do receive messages from from Satan too, every now and again.
Exactly.
So, but trust me, anyway. Trust me, bro.
And when you look at it, you know, his story and his narrative, he doesn't ever meet Jesus. He's in direct confrontation, and the Bible preserves these stories where he's in direct confrontations with the apostles, especially Peter, who is the one that, you know, Jesus points through God. So when you look at it, it's again someone that is innovating without divine authority. There is no written law about head covering in Judaism so far. There is no written law that Moses came with. There is no written law that Jesus came with. There's nothing in the Bible that says you have to cover your hair, other than these things that are from Paul, who never met Jesus, has no direct communication with God, is fighting the Christians, is fighting the apostles, and on top of that, he's basically just, you know, propagating his old Christian values into Christianity to make, you know, Christianity a version that suits him, because he's in war with a lot of the jurisprudence from Peter, and as we know, obviously, you know, through the Council of Nicaea and these kind of scenarios that take place later, 75% of the Bible that we have today is written or attributed to Paul and Luke and these people that never met Jesus. So when you put it like that, again, here is a great source of fitna, confusion.
It's a scholar.
Exactly. A very much non-working scholar.
Exactly.
And I like the point that you brought up, which was that he did have a confrontation with Simon Peter, which is actually written in the New Testament in the book of Galatians, which Paul himself pretty much wrote. So he's actually, actually vocalizing against his own self, that he himself is fighting against the one appointed by Jesus. And I mean, it doesn't make sense why he would do that. But yeah, he did it and made a big fool of himself within the New Testament. And also the reason why we say that Paul never met Jesus is because that's a fact of the matter. He never met Jesus. And when he said that he did meet Jesus, there was not a single person from the congregation of the disciples who actually met Jesus and were in contact with Jesus. Not a single one of them vouched that Paul did. And actually, there's not even a single eyewitness alongside Paul that Paul ever met Jesus. So this whole thing about now the hijab in Christianity is up to question if the Christians say that, yes, we're commanded for our women, our nuns, to wear a headscarf or a head covering.
So we find it in Christianity, but the source that is in it is quite questionable, and we have to investigate who is that, who is this creature, who is this guy, why should I believe in him, why should I trust him when he is literally anti the Holy Spirit that is inside of Peter. So,
and we're talking about a guy who was before that persecuting Christians, killing them, and then suddenly one day he's like, hey, I met Jesus and I'm gonna now side with you guys, but hey, Simon Peter, I hate you, so I'm going to be calling people to my version of Christianity, and I'm going to do my own thing. Which, by the way, happened. You guys can look into history and see how it is that all of this played out. But with Islam now this is where it gets tricky. And this only gets tricky for those who are not Arabic speakers, and for those who I think have not really understood the Quran in its original form, which, unfortunately not everybody, obviously, who has read the Quran is a native speaker to the Arabic language. As a matter of fact, most people that read the Quran, when they read it, the translations give off this understanding that the hijab must be true, that I must wear a hijab, or I must make my wife and my sister and my mother wear the hijab. That we can find in Surah Al-Nur, verse number 30. What does it say? It says, and tell the believing women to reduce some of their vision and guard their private parts, and do not expose their adornment except that which necessarily appears thereof, and to wrap a portion of their head covers over their chests. So we see here that according to this English translation that we have, we see that God is basically saying, hey, look, you have a headscarf, you're already wearing it. Now take your head covering and throw it over your chest. So like the Muslim who reads this, now they're like, so it is an obligation to wear a head covering. We have to have our women wear hijab. As a matter of fact, niqab looks amazing. I would love my wife to wear niqab. Let's have her wear niqab, because I heard Fatima Zahra wear niqab. But is that the reality? And obviously it's not. This is a corrupted English translation of the reality of the verse. And now, instead of hearing it from us, let us actually hear the man who had revealed this to us and made sense out of it. Let's see what Abu Sadiq, from him, his peace, has to say about this.
To Islam, what is the origin of this idea that hijab is obligatory in Islam? People, they always reference in Islam, unlike Judaism and Christianity, they reference verses which they consider to be clear verses, in which God, through the Prophet in the Quran, is commanding women to wear the hijab. And the verse states, and the women should strike their khimar over their jiyub. Jiyub means pockets.
Interesting.
Sometimes you'll find this verse translated as like that they strike it over their bosoms, their chest. But in reality, the word, it means like pockets. If you look it up in the dictionary, it will quote that verse from the Quran and it will say pockets. And or that which is in the pocket.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And you find out, what does it mean?
Yeah.
And they say that it means that your outfit, your shirt.
Oh.
Because
yeah, your clothing.
You have pockets in your clothing.
Yeah.
You have an opening here where your head comes out, and you have openings where your hands come out.
Okay.
And you have an opening where, you know, the rest of your body, your legs or whatever, will come out. And so everything that is in your pocket,
your clothing,
your body right here, you should strike the khimar over, the veil over.
Oh, just like a...
Yeah, so they say it's the same thing. You're striking it over your chest, you're striking it over your body parts that are within the pockets, because these are pockets, right?
Okay, yeah. Like,
these are pockets.
Yeah. Oh, I had no idea.
So, I mean, now this brings us into a different light. Abu Salik uses two words that are originally Arabic that was never explained to us before, which is the word khimar and jayub. So it seems like this khimar is not necessarily a headscarf, and the jayub, which is talking about the chest, is talking about an opening or a pocket. So like basically the woman at that time, it seems that the Prophet was just saying, or God was basically saying, to take this covering and throw it over your pocket, which is basically like an opening in the chest. So this, for example, would be a jayub. This would be a pocket because there's an opening into my chest. There's an opening into my shirt. Hussam, look, we know you. You are a native Arab speaker. You recite the Quran. We have seen you recite the Quran. You are well versed with the Quranic narratives and the verses, and you're able to understand it better than me and Jamil because you are native to that language. Can you confirm for the audience concerning this verse that Abu Salik had presented to us?
Absolutely. The idea is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَلْيَضْرِبْنَ بِخُمُرِهِنَّ عَلَى جُيُوبِهِنَّ, right? Which means what? Khimar is a cover. This is something...
And let's actually play the verse on the screen that Hussam basically... So like now we have on the screen the correction now in green for the khimar and the juyub. You can explain that.
Because in the earlier slide, the translator was not actually translating correctly. We know that translation is a huge problem in Islam and in the Arabic and to English language. But in front of you right here is actually what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has written in His book. فَلْيَضْرُبْنَا, so let them wrap to wrap a portion of their khimar, khumurihinna, over their juyubihinna. These are the words that God used. Khimar, we know for a fact in Arabic language for sure. If you can come back to us, dear brother. So yeah, the idea is that khimar is like it's a cover. This is, everybody knows in Arabic that khimar is a cover. But this is a side point. But the juyubihinna, this is where the problem comes. Yes, فَلْيَضْرُبْنَ بِخُمُرِهِنَّ عَلَى جُيُوبِهِنَّ. The word jayb, jayub is the plural of pockets. In the actual singular form, it would be jayb, which is the same word is used by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran in another verse where He was talking about Moses alayhi salatu wasalam.
Yeah, so let's pull up the ayat for Moses. And it actually says there, as an interjection, insert your hand into the opening of your garment, it will come out white without disease.
Yeah, exactly.
So Hussam, you're basically saying that the word jayub is also kind of used there, or the
it's used in a singular form in there.
Okay, so let's actually pull up that slide too, so Hussam can explain that as well.
Right. So if you see it right there in green, you will say, insert your hand into your jaybik. أدخل يدك في جيبك. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, insert your hand in your pocket. Which is jayb.
Okay, let's get back to us now.
Yes, exactly. So now we know that the translators, of course, let's prove this point. You have multiple translations of the Quran and they don't agree with each other at all. And in fact, this is a problem that is well known for anyone who reads the Arabic and the English Qurans. There's multiple translators out there and they do disagree between each other. Though, if you go back to the original root of the word itself, you'll find that the word jayb means pocket. You know, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told Moses, put your hand in your jaybik. Jaybik means, because jayb, if I want to make it your pocket, not my pocket, I say jaybek, right? I have to add it to make it specifically your pocket.
Yes.
You know, so I say your pocket.
Yeah,
God
so
is saying jaybek means your pocket.
Yeah, so basically, as we know that the khimar, which they throw over their juyuban, right? It's basically, you know, over their pockets.
Exactly.
Now we see that this same word is used in the Quran, just as it's demonstrated in the Bible. Everyone knows this famous scene where when Moses meets God in the burning bush, he tells him, put your hand in your pocket.
Exactly.
And then when you do that, or you know, in your garment, which is described in the verse, when you take it out, you'll find that it is white, without blemish or without disease. So, my God, it's like the same words are being used,
but they mean different things.
Obviously
they changed the meaning for sure.
No, they changed the meaning, and this is obviously a clear indication that the scholars and those who have translated the Quran wanted to make sure that the Muslims believed in their narrative and understood their ideology rather than translating it for what it really is. Thus, misleading the people and making them go astray.
And so the scholars of misguidance, those scholars that actually make it a duty and a fard or wajib or duty on the woman to put the hijab, they would take some of the Quranic verses. Sometimes they would interpret from their own pockets and change the meaning of the words according. And this is, by the way, one of the forms of corruption that all the scholars, all of them, from Shias and Sunni Islam, all agree that one form of the corruption in the Quran that appears today on their ground is the changing of the meanings of the Quran, where this scholar says this is what the Quran means, and that scholar says no, this is what it means, and they disagree on the meaning of the Quran. This is one of the corruptions that is 100% present. Why? Not because of the Quran itself, but because of the people who read the Quran. They change the things. So the idea is that when you're talking about a khimar, you know, what the actual thing was happening back then is this. Imagine it's very hot desert, right? And you're sitting and you have to travel long distances on a camel. Women over there, they were uncovered, just like how sometimes in here a woman could, for example, wears something that's like open, and you have like clothes that are not really that. It's hot, you know. So what they do is that to cover themselves from the heat of the sun, they would put something over their head, that is shal, like this khimar, this cover, right? That covers them. So what they do is, what Allah is telling them, put this thing over your, put this thing that's draping over your chest, to cover your chest with it, cover your body parts, you know, like don't show your body parts. He didn't say anything about the head. He's talking about the chest. He's talking about this area here. Cover this area here. That's what he's telling them. So the obligation has zero to do with the head. And in fact, just to add one more point, is that they use another Quranic verse.
What do they use?
Which is like hijab, the one that where it says hijab. They use the word hijab in it, you know. So that for the sake of argument, the word hijab itself, just because they say the khumurihinna is hijab, that's what they translate it as.
Which
somehow,
is a false translation.
Miraculously, they make a one word that means something into something else. But what is that? The word hijab is used in the Quran in many different forms. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for example, speaks from behind a hijab, which is a veil.
Which obviously
for sure you're not telling me Allah is wearing a hijab.
Or it means that like suddenly your wife now, because she's wearing hijab, Allah will speak to you through her hijab.
Exactly.
Obviously that's not what it means.
It doesn't mean that. And it's also for sure that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says when you're talking to women, the wives of the Prophet, you have to talk to them from behind a hijab, which at that time, Arab-wise, they would put these cloth pieces that would separate between the male and the female. Just like if you go to any Muslim country today, any Muslim mosque today, you'll find that the separation between the men and women, instead of rooms back then, they would have rooms, but the separator is just a cover.
You'll have like you'll have this thing that divides between a person, or like this thing that is basically like a wall or a curtain, or like drapes that like you know is something that separates the men and the women in the room, basically, which is actually found in many ahadiths. That, for example, when you know, some narrations would say, hey, one of the wives of the Prophet was teaching another person a certain matter, but was teaching them from behind a veil rather than up front while she's wearing hijab. This is something else completely different. Exactly. And also one thing that I think that the audience needs to understand too is that if you read the verse rationally, it doesn't actually make sense. I'll tell you why it doesn't make sense. Because let's just say for argument's sake, right? I'm not saying it's true, because it isn't true. But if we were to say that the khimar is the hijab, and we are then to say that the women were already wearing the hijab, right? Before the verse for the covering of the chest came. But then with this, what would this mean? This would mean that the women at the time, they were wearing the hijab perfectly. They were making sure that their hairs were not showing. But for some reason, their chests were exposed.
Yeah.
Then God had to bring down a verse saying, mashallah, the khimar is over your head. It's perfect. You're not showing your hair in front of the men, mashallah. But hey, one extra thing that you're not doing is, look, your chests are exposed. Please take your khimar, or take your hijab and throw it over your chest. If you think about it, that does not make any logical sense. What is more shameful for a woman that she does not want to other people to see? Is it the hair or is it her chest? Why would a woman be covering this and being more careful about this than this part of the area over here? I mean,
it's a strange image, really.
No, it is a strange
woman
image.
that's wearing this head cover, just like Muslims do today, and yet the chest is open. How does that make sense?
It really doesn't make any sense.
I think yes, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say this is obviously a very clear example again of an innovation of a fitna of these non-working scholars, and we have obviously to thank the Paul of Islam, Umar ibn al-Khattab for this, and there's many narrations that if we got time we'll get into in a second that shows that he's the one that campaigned for this. He's the one that is the one that advocates for this, and as again we called him the Paul of Islam because he didn't have any divine commandment from God. There is no written rule for this. Clearly now, as we've pointed out, in Islam for this, Muhammad didn't call for this, God didn't call for this. Again, it was someone that is not appointed by God, and has caused a great fitna and confusion for the Muslim Ummah today, to the point where 1,400 years on, even before that, with the eighth Imam who therefore clarified what hijab meant, which was to cover the hair. After that, but it just shows for that period of time, there was no consensus, there was no agreement, and even to today, because there's no explicit written rule, people wear it or don't wear it, they're being persecuted or not persecuted, and it's just a great big mess. Why? Because someone that isn't appointed by God went ahead of their matter and put something forward that they had no right to.
Exactly.
Led the people to be astray.
Yeah, and that is the fact of the matter. The fact of the matter is it was actually Umar ibn Khattab who actually saw other people, from other religions, with their women wearing the hijab or wearing a headscarf kind of thing, and he thought, hey, this is very nice for Muslims, for the Muslim women to do. So then he allowed them to partake in this, and already at that time, Bani Hashim anyway, the women would wear it, and it was actually a sign of their honor. It was a sign of them being a family of elites, but like not elites as in like, hey, they're better than people, but that they come from an honorable family. They come from the family of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But this was something at that time which, if a woman was going to wear this, they were seen as like high-class women in society. If a slave or a poor-class woman were to do it, well, you have an issue now. Not we as in us here in the room. I'm just saying like the Muslims at that time would have an issue with that. And the proof actually...
Umar ibn Khattab would have a problem
exactly,
with that.
Specifically Umar ibn Khattab. And let's show a narration by Anas ibn Malik, who the Sunnis narrate from him a lot. We'll pull up the slide. It says, Umar saw one of our slave girls wearing a veil, basically wearing a hijab. So he struck her and he said, do not emulate free women. So this guy over here, he's actually trying to force a woman to take off her hijab.
Subhanallah.
And now we have another another hadith by Anas ibn Malik, which continues. It says, a female slave came to Umar ibn Khattab. He knew her through some of the Ansar. She was wearing a jilbab, which veiled her. He asked her, have you been freed? She said, no. He said, what about the jilbab? What about the jilbab? Pull it down off your head. The jilbab is only for free women from among the believing women. She hesitated. So he came at her with a whip and struck her on the head until she casted off her body. So we see, we see here that Umar ibn Khattab is someone who, if he sees a slave wearing hijab, which if it was an obligation for a woman to wear, Umar ibn Khattab, who you follow as Sunnis, would not.
You would be happy.
You would be happy. But like over here, we see that he's against them. So even Umar ibn Khattab understood and knew that this was not an obligation.
Exactly.
And as a matter of fact, he despised that a woman wear hijab. And at that time, if the people actually look into history, maybe this can be your homework for tonight, look into how the Muslim women at that time who were slaves, how they dressed. And you'll find them bare chest. You'll find them walking naked. You'll find them being sold into slavery naked. And you'll find them being in harems where many, many men and eunuchs were able to see them. And they're not wearing hijab, and some of them were half naked or fully naked. Anyway, that is all the time that we have left. My God, it was a lot to talk about, but we really crammed it in on this episode. We could have talked more about this whole thing about the hijab, but this should suffice. And if you guys want to learn more, you are more than welcome to do your research and not just believe whatever we say. And Abu Saik himself said, you know, read, research, and scrutinize if you want to know the truth for yourself. And I guarantee you, you will come to the same conclusion that for sure the hijab was never an obligation, and it is completely contradictory to the teachings of Islam and even the history of Islam. Anyway, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.